The widowed millionaire caught the waitress breastfeeding his triplet daughters and made an unexpected decision. The rain came down soft that November night in Willow Creek, the kind that whispers against windows rather than pounds. Inside Cole House, the grandfather clock in the entrance hall had just struck 11:45 when Ethan Cole's Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway earlier than anyone expected. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, tie loose around his neck, jacket wrinkled from another 16-hour day at Cole Technologies. The mansion loomed before him, all gray stone and white columns, elegant as a mausoleum. 6 months since Olivia died, and he still couldn't walk through that front door without feeling like he was drowning. The house was too quiet. That's what hit him first when he stepped inside. Shoes clicking on marble, no crying. The triplets always cried at night, desperate, heart-wrenching wails that made the staff quit and made him work later just to avoid the sound of his own failure as a father. But tonight, silence. Something cold crawled up his spine. He took the stairs 2 at a time, heading for the nursery on the 2nd floor. The door stood half open, warm light spilling into the dark hallway. He pushed it wider. The scene that greeted him knocked the air from his lungs. Grace Miller sat in the rocking chair beside the cribs, still wearing her wrinkled red Harbor Diner uniform, the name tag crooked on her chest. Her dark hair had fallen loose from its ponytail, and Emma, his 6-month-old daughter Emma, was pressed against Grace's bare breast. Nursing quietly, her tiny hand curled into a fist against Grace's collarbone. Lily and Sophie slept in their cribs, finally peaceful after what must have been hours of crying. The room smelled of warm milk and baby powder, and something Ethan couldn't name, something that felt like relief and safety, and everything this house hadn't been since Olivia's last breath. "Mr. Cole." Grace's voice cracked when she saw him. Her face went white as she tried to cover herself, one hand fumbling with her uniform while the other instinctively protected Emma, who was still latched on, completely content. Ethan couldn't move, couldn't speak. His mind was a riot of shock and rage and something else, something that felt dangerously close to recognition. This stranger was touching his daughters. This woman he barely knew had her hands on his children. Had her. Well, the voice came from behind him. Smooth as silk and cold as December, Victoria Price stepped out of the shadows at the end of the hallway, her Chanel heels clicking deliberately on the hardwood floor. She looked immaculate, as always, blonde hair perfectly styled, cream cashmere sweater, pearls at her throat. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I was just coming to check on the girls when I heard you arrive." "Darling," Victoria moved to stand beside Ethan, her hand possessive on his arm. "Though it seems we have an unexpected situation." Grace was trembling now, trying to detach Emma without disturbing her, but the baby whimpered in protest. "I can explain. The girls were crying, and the new nanny left early, and they wouldn't take the bottles, and you just what?" Ethan's voice came out harder than he intended. He couldn't even finish the sentence. The image in front of him was so intimate, so wrong, so exactly like the dozens of times Olivia had sat in that same chair in that same position, humming softly while one of the triplets nursed. The thought made him furious, at Grace, at himself, at the universe that had taken Olivia and left him drowning in a life he didn't know how to navigate. "I think you should leave," he said quietly. Grace flinched, like he'd struck her. "Mr. Cole, please, I was only trying to help. They were so upset." And Emma wouldn't stop crying, and She stopped herself. But Ethan saw the pain flash across her face. It didn't mean any harm, nevertheless. Victoria's voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath. "This is highly inappropriate, don't you think? A stranger alone with the children doing this." She gestured vaguely at Grace, and somehow made it sound obscene. Grace managed to ease Emma away, quickly covering herself with shaking hands. The baby immediately started to fuss, reaching for her, Grace's eyes filled with tears. But she placed Emma carefully in her crib and stepped back. "I'll go." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I heard them crying when I got the call." And I thought. She didn't finish, just grabbed her jacket from the chair and moved toward the door. She had to pass close to Ethan on her way out. For just a second their eyes met. Hers were red-rimmed and full of something he couldn't quite read. Shame, yes, but also defiance. And underneath it all, a bone-deep sadness that reminded him of his own reflection. Then she was gone. Footsteps hurrying down the stairs, the front door closing with a soft click that echoed through the empty house. Emma started crying immediately, then Sophie, then Lily, within seconds. The nursery erupted into the familiar chaos of 3 6-month-olds in distress. Ethan stood frozen, listening to his daughter scream, Victoria sighed, delicately, beside him. "I'll call the agency for a new night nurse," she said, already pulling out her phone. "A proper one this time, really, Ethan. I don't know why you kept calling that girl. She's clearly unstable. She's helped before," Ethan heard himself say, though he wasn't sure why he was defending her. "Helped?" Victoria raised one perfect eyebrow. "Darling, she was breastfeeding your daughter. Without permission, without good Lord. Who knows what kind of diseases someone like that might." "Don't." The word came out sharp. "Just don't." Victoria's expression flickered. Surprise. Then careful concern, of course. "You're upset." "This is all very shocking." She touched his arm again. "Why don't you go downstairs? I'll handle the girls until the nurse arrives." But Ethan didn't move. He watched Victoria approach the cribs, saw how she wrinkled her nose at the smell of spit up on Sophie's onesie. Noticed the way she kept her designer sweater carefully away from grasping baby hands. And he remembered suddenly, viscerally, walking into the Harbor Diner 3 months ago and seeing Olivia there, the triplets in their carrier, and Grace crouched beside them making silly faces while she balanced 3 orders on her other arm. The babies had been giggling, actually giggling. He'd stood in the doorway watching, and Olivia had looked up at him with tears in her eyes and mouthed, "She's magic with them." 2 weeks later, Olivia was gone, and Grace had been the one he called, over and over, whenever the house fell apart. Because the triplets recognized her voice, stopped crying when she sang to them, reached their little arms up when she came near, downstairs. He heard Grace's old Honda coughing to life in the driveway. The sound of it pulling away felt wrong somehow, like he'd just made a terrible mistake. But Victoria was already on the phone with the agency. Her voice crisp and efficient, and the babies were still screaming. And Ethan was so tired he could barely stand. He turned and walked out of the nursery, leaving Victoria to deal with the chaos. In his study, he poured 3 fingers of scotch he wouldn't drink and stood at the window watching rain streak the glass. Somewhere out there, Grace Miller was driving home in her beaten-up car, probably crying, definitely humiliated, and he couldn't shake the image of Emma's tiny hand curled trustingly against her chest, or the way all 3 girls had finally been sleeping peacefully for what felt like the first time in months. What the hell had he just done? Grace made it 3 blocks before she had to pull over. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. The Honda idled roughly at the corner of Maple and 5th, right under the flickering streetlight that the city never bothered to fix. Rain drummed on the roof while she pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to breathe through the humiliation burning in her chest. What were you thinking? But she knew exactly what she'd been thinking. She'd been thinking about Emma's desperate cries over the phone, about the new nanny's panicked voice saying she couldn't handle it anymore and was leaving. She'd been thinking about 3 tiny babies, hungry and scared with no one to comfort them. She hadn't been thinking about herself at all. Grace's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stay away from the Cole family. This is your only warning." Her stomach dropped. Victoria had to be. Another buzz, this time from Marcus, her manager at the Harbor Diner. "Need to talk? Come by tomorrow before your shift." That couldn't be good. Grace dropped the phone in the cup holder and forced herself to drive. Her apartment was on the south side of Willow Creek, where the nice colonial houses gave way to squat brick buildings with bars on the windows. She parked in her usual spot, under the dying oak tree, and climbed the stairs to 2B. The apartment was dark and cold. She'd forgotten to leave the heat on again. Grace flipped the light switch, and the kitchen bulb flickered to life, illuminating all 60 square feet of her life. A kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, a futon that doubled as her bed, a card table with 1 chair, and a bathroom so small you had to sit sideways on the toilet. The only decoration was a single-framed photograph on the windowsill. Grace picked it up with trembling fingers. A sonogram, 20 weeks. They'd told her it was a boy. She'd named him James, after her grandfather, the only family member who'd ever given a damn about her. The photo blurred as tears finally came. Grace sank onto the futon, still wearing her uniform that smelled like coffee and maple syrup, and now, faintly, of baby powder. She held the sonogram to her chest and let herself really cry, for the first time in months. 15 months earlier, the Harbor Diner had been packed that Tuesday morning. Grace was working a double shift, 7 months pregnant and moving slower than usual. Her feet ached, her back screamed. But the bills didn't pay themselves. "Order up," Danny called from the kitchen. She'd grabbed the plate, 2 stacks of pancakes, 1 omelet, hash browns all around, and waddled them over to table 6. That's when she felt it. A twinge low in her belly, then a gush of warmth down her legs. The plates crashed to the floor. She remembered the ambulance ride. the harsh lights of Willow Creek General, nurses shouting medical terms she didn't understand. She remembered pushing for what felt like hours, screaming until her throat was raw. And then silence. They'd placed him in her arms for exactly 4 minutes. That's how long they let her hold her son before a nurse with kind eyes took him away. 4 minutes to memorize his tiny nose, his perfect fingers, the way his mouth was shaped like a little bow. "I'm so sorry," the doctor had said. "Sometimes these things just happen." The death certificate said respiratory failure. Grace called it the end of the world. It wrapped her breast to stop the milk from coming in, gave her pills to dry it up. But her body didn't listen. For weeks, she'd wake up with her shirt soaked, her body still trying to feed a baby who would never nurse. She'd thought about leaving Willow Creek then, starting over somewhere nobody knew her. Somewhere she wouldn't see pregnant women everywhere she looked, wouldn't hear babies crying in the grocery store, and feel her arms ache with emptiness. But leaving required money she didn't have, so she stayed, picked up extra shifts, learned to function through the fog of grief. 8 months earlier, Olivia Cole had walked into the Harbor Diner on a Wednesday afternoon, looking exhausted and carrying 3 infant carriers that she could barely manage through the door. Grace had rushed over immediately. "Here, let me help you. Thank you," Olivia breathed, practically collapsing into the booth. I needed to get out of that house. I was going crazy. The triplets couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. Lily was crying, Emma was making those pre-cry huffing noises, and only Sophie seemed content. "Rough day?" Grace asked, already bouncing Lily's carrier gently. "Rough life," Olivia laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "I love them, God, I love them so much. But I haven't slept more than 2 hours straight since they were born, and my husband works all the time." She stopped herself, looking embarrassed. "Sorry, you don't need to hear this." "No, it's okay." Grace surprised herself by sitting down across from her. The diner was slow, and something about this woman made her want to stay. "I'm Grace, Olivia," she smiled weakly, "and this is Lily." Emma and Sophie, the 3 tiny dictators who've completely taken over my life. Grace looked down at Emma, who had escalated to full crying now, without thinking. She reached into the carrier and lifted the baby out. "May I, please?" Emma settled immediately against Grace's chest. The crying stopped. She made a little snuffling sound and nuzzled closer, and Grace felt something crack open in her chest, something painful and beautiful all at once. This was what James would have felt like. This weight, this warmth, this tiny heartbeat against her own. "How did you?" Olivia stared. "She never settles that fast." "Not even for me," Grace couldn't answer. She was too busy memorizing the feeling of a baby in her arms again, even if it was someone else's baby, even if it made her heart hurt so badly she could barely breathe. They stayed for 2 hours. Olivia drank 3 cups of coffee and cried a little and laughed a lot. Grace held each of the triplets, learned their different personalities, felt her body respond in ways she'd tried so hard to suppress. When Olivia finally left, she'd squeezed Grace's hand. "Thank you. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to just understand anytime," Grace had said, and meant it. Olivia came back the next week, and the week after that. Grace learned she'd been a literature professor before the babies, that she'd met Ethan in college, that she was terrified she wasn't cut out for motherhood but was trying her best. And Grace had someone to pour her unused maternal instincts into. Someone who needed her. 3 little someones, actually. The last time Grace saw Olivia was a Tuesday in March. She'd brought the girls in, looking more tired than usual. "I haven't been feeling well," she'd admitted. "Headaches, dizziness. My doctor says it's just exhaustion, but you should get a second opinion," Grace had urged. "I will after Ethan gets back from his business trip next week," but there was no next week. Olivia collapsed at home 3 days later. A brain aneurysm, they said, dead before the ambulance arrived. The triplets had been 4 months old. Grace found out from a customer who'd seen it on the news. She'd dropped a full pot of coffee and stood there in the middle of the diner, shaking while her manager cleaned up the mess. 2 weeks after the funeral, her phone rang at 2 in the morning. An unknown number. "Is this Grace Miller?" A man's voice, hoarse with exhaustion. "This is Ethan Cole, my wife. Olivia spoke about you. The babies. They won't stop crying, and I don't know what to do. Would you be willing to? I'll be right there," Grace had said. And she had been, that night, and a dozen nights after. Whenever Ethan called in desperation, whenever the nannies quit or failed, whenever the triplets needed someone who remembered their mother's touch. Until tonight, when everything fell apart. Grace set the sonogram back on the windowsill and wiped her eyes. Her phone buzzed again. "Marcus, seriously. Grace, we need to talk ASAP." She knew what that meant. Victoria had gotten to him somehow, said something, done something, pulled strings that Grace didn't even know existed. She was going to lose her job, maybe she already had, and the worst part, she couldn't even regret what she'd done. Emma had been hungry, desperate, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Grace's body had responded the way it always did, the way it had responded for 15 months, even without a baby to feed. She'd made the only choice her heart knew how to make, even if it cost her everything. Victoria Price stood in front of her bedroom mirror at the Cole mansion, removing her pearl earrings one at a time. Her reflection looked back at her with cold satisfaction. Perfect. Everything had gone absolutely perfect. She'd been planning this for weeks, watching Grace's schedule, noting every time Ethan called the girl over, cataloging every soft look that crossed his face when those triplets finally stopped screaming in Grace's presence. Victoria hadn't clawed her way to the edge of becoming Mrs. Ethan Cole just to be replaced by some nobody waitress with a savior complex. The trap had been elegant in its simplicity. Fire the night nanny early, make sure the babies were hungry and hysterical, ensure Grace would be called in desperation, then accidentally text Ethan that she'd be checking on the girls, knowing he'd come home to find exactly what Victoria had orchestrated. A poor girl with her breast out, feeding his daughter like some kind of wet nurse from the 1800s. The disgust on Ethan's face had been everything Victoria hoped for. She smiled at her reflection and reached for her phone. The next morning, Grace walked into the Harbor Diner at 6:30, half an hour before her shift. The breakfast rush hadn't started yet. Marcus was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine with more force than necessary. He looked up when the bell chimed. His expression made her stomach sink. "Grace, office now." She followed him to the back, past the kitchen where Danny was prepping bacon, into the cramped office that smelled like old coffee and disappointment. Marcus closed the door. "I got a call last night," he said without preamble, "from a Victoria Price. Said she's engaged to Ethan Cole." Grace's mouth went dry. "Marcus, she told me you've been harassing the Cole family, that you've been showing up at their house uninvited, that you're obsessed with Mr. Cole, and that last night he stopped, his jaw working. She said you did something inappropriate with one of his kids." "That's not true." Grace's voice cracked. "I was called there. The babies needed help. I would never." She also mentioned that the Cole family is considering legal action. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. "Against anyone who enables your behavior." The implication hit her like a punch to the gut. "You're firing me. I'm protecting my business, Grace. The Coles are one of the wealthiest families in Willow Creek if they decide to make trouble." He finally looked at her, and she saw something like pity in his face. "I can't afford to be on their bad side. I'm sorry, I've worked here for 4 years. Grace heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. "Marcus, I need this job. I can't. I'll give you 2 weeks severance. That's the best I can do. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find another job in a town where everyone knew everyone. Where Victoria Price could make one phone call and destroy her anywhere she applied." Grace walked out of that office in a daze. She untied her apron, hung it on the hook by the kitchen, and ignored Danny's concerned look as she pushed through the door into the gray morning. Her phone buzzed before she reached her car. "Unknown number. Told you to stay away. This is just the beginning." By noon, Grace had 3 more texts. The first was from her landlord. "Got a noise complaint about your unit. Need to discuss lease violations." She'd never made noise, never had parties, barely had visitors. It was bullshit, and they both knew it. The second was from her bank. "Suspicious activity detected on your account. Please call immediately." When she called, they told her someone had tried to report fraudulent charges under her name. The charges were cleared, but it would take 3 to 5 business days to resolve, and in the meantime, her account was frozen. The third text came from a number she recognized, Sarah Chun, her only real friend in Willow Creek. "Grace, what the hell? People are saying crazy things about you. Call me." Grace didn't call. She sat in her parked Honda outside the pharmacy, where she'd gone to pick up tampons she could no longer afford. And she felt the walls closing in. Victoria Price was systematically destroying her life. That afternoon, Grace drove past Cole House without meaning to. She told herself she was taking the scenic route home, that she wasn't hoping to catch a glimpse of the triplets through the window. But when she saw Ethan's Mercedes in the driveway, she slowed down, just for a second, just long enough to see him walking to his car with his phone pressed to his ear, his face drawn and exhausted. He looked up. Their eyes met through her windshield. Grace's heart stopped. Then Ethan looked away, got in his car, and drove off without acknowledging her at all. She felt like she'd been slapped. Victoria was having lunch at the Willow Creek's most exclusive restaurant, when her phone rang. She excused herself from her table, the mayor's wife and 2 other society women who loved gossip, almost as much as Victoria did, and stepped into the ladies' room. "Hello, Ms. Price," an oily voice she recognized. "James Pemberton, the private investigator she'd hired last month. Got what you asked for. Go on." Grace Miller, 26, no family to speak of. Father unknown. Mother died of an overdose when she was 12, bounced around foster care until she aged out. Got pregnant at 24, father of the baby skipped town, kid was born premature, died the same day. He paused. Hospital records show she had a psychological evaluation after. Depression, trauma, the usual. Victoria's smile widened. Any medications? History of instability. She was prescribed antidepressants. Stopped taking them after 3 months. Probably couldn't afford them. And get this, there's a notation in her file about inappropriate maternal attachment to unrelated infants. One of the nurses reported that she tried to visit the NICU multiple times after her son died. Perfect, absolutely perfect. "Email me everything," Victoria said. "And James, I need you to do one more thing by evening." The rumors had spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Grace Miller had lost a baby and gone crazy. Grace Miller was stalking the Cole family. Grace Miller had broken into Cole House and done something disturbing with one of the triplets. Grace Miller was dangerous, unstable, obsessed. Sarah finally caught up with her at the grocery store, pulling her aside in the frozen food aisle. "What is going on?" Sarah hissed. "Mrs. Chun at the library told me you were arrested. Randy at the gas station said you threatened Ethan Cole, and someone posted on the community Facebook page that you're mentally ill and shouldn't be around children." Grace felt dizzy. "None of that is true." "Then where is it coming from?" "Victoria Price." Grace's voice was hollow. "She's engaged to Ethan. She wants me gone." "Why would she?" Sarah stopped. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Oh, Grace. I didn't what? Fall for him. You fell for Ethan Cole." "No." But even as she said it, Grace wondered if it was true. Not that she loved Ethan, she barely knew him. But the life he represented, the family, the 3 little girls who reached for her like she mattered. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe she had fallen for the fantasy of belonging somewhere. "You need to be careful," Sarah said quietly. "People like Victoria Price don't play fair. And you," she looked at Grace with something like pity, "you don't have anything to fight back with." That night, Grace's landlord called, not texted, called. "Miss Miller, I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the premises by the end of the month." "What?" "You can't. I've never missed rent, never caused problems. I've received multiple complaints from other tenants, and frankly, I can't have someone with your reputation living in my building. It's bad for business." "My reputation?" Grace's voice rose. "What reputation?" "I haven't done anything." "That's not what I've heard." His voice was cold. "End of the month, Miss Miller. I'm being generous by giving you that much time." He hung up. Grace stood in her tiny apartment, phone still pressed to her ear, and felt something break inside her. Her job, her home, her reputation. Victoria had taken everything in less than 24 hours. And the worst part, there was nothing Grace could do about it. She had no money for a lawyer, no connections, no power. She was exactly what she'd always been, and nobody from nowhere. Stupid enough to think she could matter in the life of people who lived in mansions and drove Mercedes and had more money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes. Her phone buzzed one more time. Unknown number. Leave Willow Creek. "There's nothing left for you here. This is your final warning." Grace looked at the sonogram on her windowsill, at the picture of the son she'd never get to raise, at the tiny apartment that had never felt like home, but was all she had. Victoria Price wanted her gone, and maybe that was exactly what she should do. Run, disappear, stop fighting a battle she'd already lost outside her window. Willow Creek twinkled with lights from houses where families sat down to dinner together, where babies were safe and loved and growing up with everything they'd ever need. Grace closed her eyes and tried not to think about 3 little girls crying in the dark, reaching for someone who wasn't there. Grace lasted 3 days before she broke. 3 days of packing boxes she couldn't afford to ship anywhere. 3 days of job applications that went unanswered. 3 days of lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about Emma's tiny hand curled against her chest. On the 4th day, she drove past Cole House again. She told herself it was on the way to the post office, that she wasn't looking for anything in particular. But when she saw the new nanny, a stern-looking woman in scrubs, carrying Sophie out to the garden, something in Grace's chest tightened. Sophie looked thinner than she'd been 4 days ago. Grace slowed the Honda to a crawl, squinting through the wrought iron fence. The nanny set Sophie down on a blanket with all the tenderness of someone handling a sack of potatoes, then pulled out her phone and turned away. Sophie started to cry. The nanny didn't even look up. Grace's hands clenched on the steering wheel. "Not your problem anymore," she told herself. "Drive away." But she didn't. That night, Grace parked 2 blocks from the mansion and walked through the park that bordered the Cole property. The fence was ornate, but not impossible to see through, especially from the old oak tree whose branches stretched over the stone wall. She felt ridiculous, creepy even, but something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. The same way she'd felt it the night James stopped moving inside her, that primal, animal knowledge that something precious was in danger. Through the second-floor window, she could see into the nursery. The lights were on, and all 3 triplets were screaming. The nanny, Grace could just make out her silhouette, stood in the corner with her arms crossed, watching, not moving, not helping, just waiting. Grace checked her watch. 7:30, bedtime. The girls should have been fed 20 minutes ago. She waited. 15 minutes, 20, the crying got worse, more desperate. Lily's wail had that edge to it that meant she was about to make herself sick. Finally, the nanny moved. She prepared bottles with jerky, annoyed movements, then propped them against rolled blankets in each crib instead of holding the babies while they ate. Grace had seen enough. She turned to leave and nearly ran straight into someone standing behind the oak tree. Jesus! Her hand flew to her chest. The woman was older, maybe 60, wearing a cardigan despite the mild evening. She had kind eyes and tired lines around her mouth. Grace recognized her after a moment. Mrs. Chun, the woman who'd worked as the Coles housekeeper before Olivia died. "You're the girl from the diner, Mrs. Chun said quietly. "Grace, right. I was just..." Grace's face burned. "I wasn't doing anything wrong, I know, Mrs. Chun glanced up at the nursery window. "You were checking on them." "I've been doing the same thing," Grace blinked. "You have?" "Every night this week, Mrs. Chun's expression darkened. "Something's not right in that house. Ever since that Price woman took over, the babies have been..." She stopped herself. "I shouldn't say. It's not my place anymore. Please." Grace stepped closer. "What's happening to them, Mrs. Chun studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." They walked to Mrs. Chun's house 3 streets over, a modest colonial with flower boxes in the windows. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and old books. Mrs. Chun led Grace to the kitchen table and pulled out a manila envelope. "Olivia gave this to me 2 days before she died." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "She made me promise to give it to Ethan if anything happened to her, but when I tried..." "Miss Price intercepted me at the door," said Mr. Cole was too distraught for visitors, and she'd make sure he got it, but she didn't give it to him. Grace said, "I don't know, maybe she did, maybe she didn't." Mrs. Chun pulled out a letter. The paper yellowed at the edges, Olivia's handwriting looping across the page. "But I made a copy, just in case." Grace's hands shook as she took it. The letter was dated March 10th, 5 days before Olivia's death. "Dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. The headaches have been getting worse, and I just know that something's wrong. The doctors keep saying it's stress. But a mother's intuition is never wrong. I need you to promise me something. Promise you'll choose people who love our girls with their whole hearts, not people who love the idea of being part of our family. I've watched how staff comes and goes, how some of them look at the triplets like they're obligations instead of miracles. But there's one person who sees them the way I do. Grace Miller from the Harbor Diner, the first time she held Emma. I saw something in her eyes, recognition, maybe, understanding. She's been through something terrible. I can tell, but she looks at my babies like they're the most precious things in the world. If something happens to me, please find people like Grace. People with gentle hands and patient hearts. Don't let anyone near them who sees them as accessories or inconveniences. Love them enough for both of us, always." Olivia Grace's vision blurred. She had to read it twice before the words fully sank in. "She saw it," Grace whispered. She knew Mrs. Cole was a smart woman. Mrs. Chun took the letter back carefully. She knew who had a good heart and who was wearing a mask. "Why didn't you tell Ethan?" "I tried. Twice. First time Miss Price blocked me. Second time, I called his office. But his assistant said he wasn't taking calls about household matters, Mrs. Chun's mouth pressed into a thin line, and then I heard what happened to you, the rumors. How Miss Price made sure everyone in town thought you were dangerous. Grace slumped in her chair. So what am I supposed to do with this if I show up with a letter from his dead wife? He'll think I'm even more obsessed, maybe Mrs. Chun stood and walked to the counter, returning with a USB drive. But maybe he'll listen if you have proof of what's really happening in that house. What proof, mister? Cole installed security cameras throughout the mansion after the triplets were born. Motion activated, automatic backup to cloud storage. He gave me the admin password in case of emergencies. She set the USB drive on the table between them. I've been downloading footage for the last 3 days. Since that new nanny started, Grace stared at the small piece of plastic. What's on it? See for yourself, back in her apartment. Grace plugged the USB into her ancient laptop. The files took forever to load, but when they finally did, her stomach dropped. Timestamp, November 18th, 2:47 p.m. Victoria standing in the nursery. Watching the triplets cry, Lily was pulling herself up on the crib bars, face red and wet. Victoria walked over, leaned close, and said something Grace couldn't hear. Then she pushed Lily back down, not gently. Lily's wail intensified. Victoria smiled and walked out. Timestamp, November 19th, 6:15 p.m. The new nanny, preparing bottles. Grace watched as she deliberately made them cooler than they should be. Testing the temperature on her wrist and then shrugging, the triplets struggled with the cold milk. Turning their heads away, crying harder, the nanny scrolled through her phone. Timestamp, November 20th, 8:30 a.m. Victoria. Again, this time changing Sophie's diaper. She was rough. Yanking the baby's legs up without support, Sophie screamed. Victoria pressed down on her thigh, hard enough to leave a mark. Stop being dramatic. Victoria's voice came through tinny but clear. You're fine. Grace's hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the mouse. There were hours of footage. Days. Little moments of negligence and cruelty that individually might seem like nothing, but together painted a horrifying picture. The triplets weren't being cared for. They were being endured. And in every clip where Grace appeared, because there were some, from before that night, the change in the babies was obvious. They reached for her, calmed in her arms. Their cries turned to coos. The contrast was devastating. Grace sat back, tears streaming down her face. She had proof, real, undeniable proof, that those babies were suffering. But what good was proof when no one would listen to her? Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press accept. Hello, Miss Miller, a woman's voice. Older, hesitant. This is Patricia Crenshaw. I was the night nurse for the Cole triplets until Miss Price fired me last month. Grace sat up straight. Why are you calling me? Because I heard what she did to you. And a long pause. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't warn you. Miss Price is dangerous. She's not going to stop until you're completely destroyed. Or worse. She told me once that anyone who threatened her future would regret it. And the way she looked at those babies when they cried, Patricia's voice dropped. Miss Miller. I don't think she'd hurt them directly, but I don't think she'd stop someone else from hurting them either, as long as it couldn't be traced back to her. The line went dead. Grace stared at her phone. Then, at the laptop screen frozen on an image of Victoria's cold smile, she thought about running, about leaving Willow Creek like Victoria wanted. But then she thought about Emma's tiny fingers, about Lily's determined little face, about Sophie's soft sighs when Grace sang to her. Those babies couldn't run, couldn't fight back, couldn't tell anyone what was happening to them. Grace was the only one who knew, the only one who had proof, the only one who gave a damn, which meant she was also the only one who could save them, even if it meant facing Ethan Cole and risking everything. Ethan Cole hadn't slept properly in 6 days, not since the night he'd found Grace in the nursery, not since he'd watched her walk out of his house with tears streaming down her face, while his daughters screamed like the world was ending. He stood at his office window on the 10th floor of Cole Technologies, watching Willow Creek sprawl below him in the gray November afternoon. His reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, unshaven, a man who looked like he was barely holding it together, because he wasn't. The triplets were worse than ever. They cried constantly, barely ate, woke up every hour through the night. He'd gone through 3 nannies in 6 days. The current one, a stern woman with impeccable references that Victoria had personally vetted, had quit via text message this morning. I can't do this anymore. Those babies need more than I can give them. I'm sorry." Ethan had read it 5 times, trying to understand what the hell was happening. These were professional caregivers, trained, experienced women who'd raised dozens of children. Why couldn't any of them handle 3 6-month-olds? His phone buzzed. "Victoria, darling, found another nanny service. They're sending someone tomorrow. Don't worry, I'm handling everything. Focus on your meeting with the investors. Love you." He should have felt grateful. Victoria had been tireless these past months, taking over household management, organizing staff, making sure he had space to grieve and work. She was perfect, supportive, everything a man in his position could want. So why did he feel like he was suffocating? "Mr. Cole," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 2 p.m. is here. Send them in." But Ethan couldn't focus on quarterly projections and market expansion. His mind kept circling back to that night, to Grace's face when he'd told her to leave, to the way Emma had reached for her even as Grace was walking away, to the feeling that he'd made a terrible, irreversible mistake. The meeting dragged on for 2 hours. By the time the investors left, satisfied with his presentation, but clearly concerned about his haggard appearance, Ethan felt like he'd run a marathon. He loosened his tie and pulled out his phone. 7 missed calls, all from the house. His heart stopped. He called back immediately. "Mr. Cole." The nanny's voice was strained. "You need to come home. Now, what happened? Are the girls hurt?" "No. But Lily won't stop crying, and Sophie threw up everything she ate today. And Emma," the woman's voice cracked. "Emma's barely responsive. She just lies there, won't take a bottle. Won't engage, sir. I think something's seriously wrong." Ethan was already grabbing his jacket. "I'm calling an ambulance." Miss Price already did. They said if she's breathing and not in immediate distress, to bring her to the pediatrician. "But I really think I'll be there in 10 minutes. He made it in 7, breaking every speed limit between downtown and the residential district. The mansion loomed before him, beautiful and cold as always. He burst through the front door. Victoria met him in the foyer, perfectly composed in a cream sweater set. "Ethan, thank God I've been trying to reach you. Where are they, nursery? But darling, you need to calm down. The nanny is being dramatic. Babies have fussy days." He didn't wait for her to finish. He took the stairs 3 at a time. The nursery was chaos. Lily screaming in her crib, face purple with exertion. Sophie curled up with her knees to her chest, whimpering, and Emma lay on her back, staring at nothing. Her eyes were open but unfocused. She wasn't crying, wasn't moving, just existing. Terror shot through him. "Emma, baby girl." He scooped her up. She was warm, breathing, but limp in his arms. No recognition in her eyes, no response when he touched her cheek. "How long has she been like this?" he demanded. The nanny wrung her hands. "I noticed it this morning. She wouldn't take her bottle. I thought maybe she was tired, but why didn't you call me immediately? Miss Price said not to bother you unless it was an emergency. My daughter not eating is an emergency." His voice echoed off the walls. Lily's crying intensified. Victoria appeared in the doorway. "Ethan, you're scaring everyone. Emma's fine. Babies go through phases. Does she look fine to you?" He turned. Emma cradled against his chest. "Look at her. Victoria, really look at her." For just a second, something flickered across Victoria's face. Not concern, something else, something that made Ethan's blood run cold. Then her expression smoothed into sympathy. "Of course I'm worried. That's why I've been trying to find the best care for them. But these things take time. We're going to the hospital." Ethan headed for the door. "All of them." "Right now, that's not necessary. I don't care what you think is necessary." He spun to face her. "These are my daughters, Victoria, mine, and something is wrong." The mask slipped again, just for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, Ethan saw it. The flash of annoyance, of impatience, of someone who'd been inconvenienced. Not someone who loved these children. The realization hit him like a freight train. At Willow Creek General, the pediatrician examined all 3 triplets while Ethan paced the hallway like a caged animal. Victoria sat in the waiting room, scrolling through her phone with studied disinterest. "Doctor." Sarah Martinez finally emerged, her expression grave. "Mr. Cole, can we talk privately?" They stepped into a consultation room. "Drive." Martinez closed the door. "Your daughters are malnourished," she said without preamble. "Not severely, but enough to be concerning. Emma especially." "When was the last time they had a proper feeding?" Ethan's mouth went dry. "They had bottles every 3 hours. The nanny, the bottles aren't enough. They're underweight for their age, and their feeding schedule has clearly been inconsistent." She pulled up a chart. "Emma's particularly affected because she requires more frequent feeding than her sisters. She's shutting down from lack of proper nutrition and comfort. Shutting down, failure to thrive. It happens when infants don't receive adequate physical and emotional care. If this continues, she paused, Mr. Cole, I'm required by law to report cases of potential neglect. The word hit him like a slap. Neglect. I provide everything they need. Money isn't care. These babies need consistent, loving attention. They need to be held while they eat. Engage with, comforted, doctor. Martinez's expression softened. I'm not saying you're a bad father, but someone in your household isn't meeting their basic needs. Ethan sank into a chair. How do I fix this? Find someone who can give them what they need. And do it fast on the drive home. With 3 sleeping triplets finally peaceful in their car seats, Victoria tried again. See? I told you it wasn't serious. The doctor just wants you to hire more staff. She said they're malnourished, Victoria. That's ridiculous. They eat constantly. Do they? He glanced at her. When's the last time you fed one of them yourself? She blinked. That's what we have nannies for. When's the last time you held one without someone asking you to, Ethan? That's not fair. I've been managing the entire household. Answer the question. Silence filled the car, through the rearview mirror. Ethan watched his daughter sleep. Emma's face was still too pale. Lily's cheeks were thinner than they should be. Sophie clutched a blanket like a lifeline, and he thought about Grace. About how the triplets had been thriving when she was around. How they'd reach for her immediately. How even in the worst moments, she'd been able to calm them. About how he'd thrown her out and let Victoria convince him she was dangerous, I think. Victoria's voice was careful. I think you're exhausted, darling. Once we get a new nanny tomorrow, everything will be better. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. He was remembering something Olivia had said once. Near the end, the babies know who loves them. Trust their instincts more than any resume. The triplets had loved Grace, and they clearly didn't love Victoria. That night, after the triplets were finally settled with yet another temporary nurse, Ethan stood in his study, nursing a scotch he wouldn't drink. His laptop sat open on the desk, cursor blinking in the search bar. He typed, Grace Miller, Willow Creek. The results made his stomach turn. Dozens of posts on community forums, Facebook threads, gossip sites, all painting her as unstable, obsessed, dangerous. But something felt wrong about it. Too coordinated. Too vicious, like someone had orchestrated a campaign. He opened his security system app, the one linked to the mansion's cameras. He'd installed them throughout the house after the triplets were born, including the nursery. Mostly he forgot they were there. But now, he scrolled back through saved footage. Found the night Grace had been there, watched himself arrive. Watched his own face twist with shock and anger. Watched Grace's devastation as she left. Then he kept watching. Watched what happened after. Victoria standing in the nursery doorway with that cold smile. The new nanny arriving the next day. Propping bottles instead of holding the babies. Days of footage showing his daughters crying, being handled roughly, left alone for too long. And then older footage from before that night. Grace sitting in the rocking chair, all 3 triplets somehow calm. Grace singing softly while they ate. Grace walking the floor at 3 a.m. with a crying baby. Patient and gentle even though she looked exhausted. The difference was staggering. Ethan's hand shook as he closed the laptop. His phone sat beside it, Victoria's last text still on the screen. Sleep well, darling. Everything will be perfect soon. But nothing was perfect. Nothing had been perfect since he'd let Grace walk out that door. His daughters were starving for more than food. They were starving for someone who actually loved them. And he'd sent that someone away. Grace sat on the floor of her half-packed apartment, surrounded by boxes she couldn't afford to move, and a life that had fallen apart in less than a week. The eviction notice on her counter gave her 23 more days. The balance in her frozen bank account, $47. Job prospects, 0. She should leave Willow Creek, cut her losses, start over somewhere nobody knew her name or the rumors Victoria had spread. It's what any sane person would do. But Grace had never been good at walking away from people who needed her. The USB drive sat on her coffee table like an accusation. She'd watched the footage 5 times now, and each viewing made her angrier. Those babies were suffering, not dramatically. No one was beating them or starving them, but in 1,000 small cruelties that would never show up on a medical exam. Cold bottles, rough handling, hours left crying. The systematic removal of anything that resembled love. Grace picked up her phone. Mrs. Chun had given her Ethan's personal cell number with a warning. Use it wisely. You'll only get one chance. She'd been staring at those 10 digits for 2 days. Trying to find the courage to call. What would she even say? Hi, remember me? The crazy woman you kicked out, well, your fiancé, is slowly breaking your daughter's spirits. And I have video proof. He'd hang up. Or worse, he'd call the police and accuse her of harassment, exactly like Victoria wanted. But if she didn't call, Grace closed her eyes and saw Emma's face, that tiny, trusting face that looked so much like... She stopped that thought before it could finish. She couldn't think about James right now. Couldn't let herself remember how similar Emma's cry was to the one she'd heard in her dreams for 15 months. If she let herself feel it all, she'd break, and she needed to be strong. Her phone buzzed. "Sarah, please tell me you're not doing anything stupid." Grace almost laughed. "Too late for that," she typed back. "Define stupid, Sarah. Whatever you're planning with the Cole family. People are talking, Grace." "They're saying you won't leave them alone," Victoria Price told Mrs. Chun at the salon that she's considering a restraining order. "Of course she was, Grace. Let her try. I haven't done anything wrong." "Sarah, that doesn't matter. You know how this town works. The Prices and the Coles own half of Willow Creek. You're a waitress with no family and a dead baby. Who do you think people will believe?" The words stung because they were true. Grace had learned that lesson. Young nobody cared about foster kids, about girls who got pregnant by men who disappeared, about women who worked double shifts just to afford a studio apartment. People like her were disposable, but those triplets weren't. They had money, status, a father who loved them, even if he was too blind to see what was happening. They deserved someone to fight for them, even if that someone was a nobody waitress with nothing left to lose. Grace pulled up Ethan's number and pressed call before she could change her mind. It rang 4 times. She was about to hang up when he answered. "Hello." His voice was rough, exhausted. Grace's throat closed. She forced words out. "Mr. Cole, this is Grace Miller. Please don't hang up." Silence, long enough that she thought he had hung up. "Then, how did you get this number? That doesn't matter. What matters is," she took a breath, "your daughters are in danger." "Excuse me." The exhaustion vanished, replaced by sharp alertness. "What are you talking about? I know you think I'm crazy. I know what Victoria's been saying about me, but I have proof that she's..." Grace struggled for the right words. "She's not taking care of them properly. Neither are the nannies she's hiring. The triplets are being neglected, and I can prove it, Miss Miller. I have security footage. From your own cameras, weeks of it, and before you accuse me of hacking or breaking in. I didn't. Someone who cares about those babies gave me access because they're terrified of what's happening in your house." Another long silence. Grace could hear him breathing. What kind of footage? Victoria being rough with them, nannies ignoring them, the girls crying for hours, being fed cold milk from propped bottles instead of being held. Her voice cracked. "Mr. Cole, Emma's shutting down. I saw it in the last recordings. She stopped trying to engage." Do you know what that means?" the doctor said. He stopped. "How do you know about the doctor?" "I've been watching the house." The admission made her sound exactly as crazy as Victoria claimed, not in a creepy way. I needed to know they were okay, and they're not okay." "You've been stalking my family." His voice went cold. "No, I've been trying to protect 3 babies who can't protect themselves." Grace was standing now, pacing her tiny apartment. "I know how this sounds. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm begging you, just look at the footage. That's all I'm asking. Look at what's really happening when you're not there. And if I do, what then? Do you expect me to believe you over my fiancé? I expect you to believe your own eyes." Grace's hand tightened on the phone. "I expect you to remember what your wife asked you to do. To find people who love those girls, not people who see them as inconveniences." The sharp intake of breath told her she'd hit a nerve. "How do you know what Olivia made?" "Because she wrote it down in a letter she gave to Mrs. Chun before she died. A letter that never made it to you because Victoria intercepted it." "That's impossible, is it?" Grace pressed. "Ask yourself why you've never seen that letter. Ask yourself why Mrs. Chun stopped coming to the house right after Olivia's funeral. Ask yourself why every nanny Victoria hires quits within days. This is insane. Then prove me wrong. Meet me. Let me show you what I have. And if I'm lying, if I'm making all of this up, then call the police. Get that restraining order. I'll leave Willow Creek and never come back." She heard him moving. A door closing. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" The question caught her off guard. What did she want? Money? Revenge on Victoria? A place in his life? No, none of that. "I want those babies to be safe," Grace said quietly. "That's all I've ever wanted. And right now, they're not." Ethan agreed to meet her at Riverside Park in 2 hours. Neutral ground, public, during daylight. Grace could hear the suspicion in his voice, the part of him that still thought she was unhinged. But he'd agreed. That was something. She spent an hour getting ready, which was ridiculous considering she only owned 3 outfits that weren't stained with coffee. She settled on jeans and her cleanest sweater, pulled her hair back, tried to look stable and trustworthy instead of desperate and homeless. The USB drive felt like it weighed 100 pounds in her jacket pockets, Sarah called when she was heading out the door. "Where are you going?" "Meeting someone, Grace. I have to do this." "Sarah, I can't walk away knowing what I know, even if it destroys you." Grace thought about Emma's tiny fingers, about the way Lily smiled when someone sang to her, about Sophie's soft sighs when she finally felt safe enough to sleep. Even then, she said, and hung up. Riverside Park was nearly empty on a cold November afternoon. Dead leaves skittered across the walking path. The river moved slow and gray beyond the bare trees. Ethan was already there, standing by the fountain with his hands in his coat pockets. He looked different than he had that night, older, more worn down, like he'd been fighting a battle he didn't know how to win. Grace approached slowly, giving him space to change his mind, to walk away, to pull out his phone and call security. He did none of those things. Just watched her come closer, with an expression she couldn't read. "Miss Miller, Mr. Cole." She stopped a few feet away. "Thank you for coming, show me. No small talk. No preamble, just straight to business." Grace pulled out the USB drive. "Everything's on here, security footage from the past 3 weeks, and a copy of Olivia's letter." He took it carefully. "Like it might bite him. If this is some kind of manipulation, it's not." Grace met his eyes. "I have nothing to gain from this. No job, no home, no reputation left in this town. Victoria made sure of that. All I have is the truth. And those 3 little girls who deserve better than what they're getting." Something shifted in his expression. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I know it." Her voice was steady despite her shaking hands. "Watch the footage, all of it. Then decide who you believe." Ethan looked down at the USB drive, then back at her. "The hospital said they're malnourished. That Emma's showing signs of failure to thrive." Grace's heart clenched. "I know, I could see it happening. That's why I couldn't stay away, even though it's cost you everything. Some things are worth more than everything." She smiled sadly. "Your wife understood that. I think you do too. When you're not too buried in grief and work to see straight." He flinched. She'd crossed the line, probably. But they were past the point of polite boundaries. "I'll watch it," he said finally, "tonight, after the girls are asleep. And then, he pocketed the drive. "Then we'll see." Ethan waited until midnight. Victoria had gone home hours ago. She kept her own penthouse downtown. Said it was important they maintain some independence before the wedding. He'd been grateful for that tonight. Grateful for the quiet mansion, for the sleeping triplets finally peaceful after another hellish day. For the privacy to face whatever was on this USB drive. He sat in his study with a glass of scotch he'd actually drank this time, and plugged the drive into his laptop. The files loaded slowly, dozens of video clips, all labeled with dates and timestamps, and one document titled simply, Olivia_letter, PDF. Ethan's hand hovered over the mouse. He wasn't sure which would hurt more, watching his daughter suffer, or reading his dead wife's last words. He opened the letter first, "Dearest Ethan," by the 3rd line. His vision blurred. By the end, he was gripping the desk so hard his knuckles went white. Find people like Grace, people with gentle hands and patient hearts. Olivia had seen it, had known somehow, even before her death. She'd recognized something in Grace that Ethan had been too blind or too loyal to Victoria to acknowledge. His wife had trusted a stranger with their daughters more than he'd trusted his own instincts. He refilled his scotch and opened the first video file. November 8th, 2:47 p.m. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago. Before the night he'd found Grace in the nursery, before everything fell apart. The video showed Victoria entering the nursery, where all 3 triplets were napping. Sophie stirred. Making small, fussy noises, Victoria walked over to the crib. "Shut up," she hissed. Her voice was low, but the audio picked it up clearly. "I have a headache, and you're making it worse." Sophie's fussing escalated to crying. Victoria leaned over the crib and Ethan watched his fiancée roughly grab his daughter's leg and yank it straight. "I said be quiet," Sophie screamed. Victoria stormed out, leaving her wailing. Ethan's stomach turned. He forced himself to keep watching. November 10th, 6:15 p.m., a nanny he didn't recognize, preparing bottles. She tested the temperature, frowned, then shrugged and gave them to the babies anyway. The triplets struggled with the cold milk, turning away, crying harder. The nanny pulled out her phone and scrolled through social media while propped bottles rolled away from seeking mouths. November 12th, 8:30 a.m. Victoria changing Sophie again. She was on her phone, one hand holding the baby down with more force than necessary. Sophie cried. Victoria pressed harder on her thigh, hard enough that Ethan could see the red mark forming. "Stop being such a drama queen," Victoria muttered. "You're fine." She finished the change without washing her hands first. Yanked Sophie's onesie on so roughly that the baby's arm got caught in the sleeve. Sophie wailed. Victoria left her that way and walked out. Ethan stood up, paced to the window, tried to breathe through the rage building in his chest. This was the woman he'd been planning to marry, the woman he'd trusted with his daughters, the woman who'd convinced him that Grace was the problem. He sat back down and opened more files. The pattern was clear. Days of neglect, small cruelties. Babies left crying, bottles propped instead of held. Nannies following Victoria's instructions to let them learn to self-soothe, which really meant ignore them until they give up, and through it all. Victoria's mask slipping in moments when she thought no one was watching. The irritation, the impatience, the complete lack of maternal warmth. Then Ethan found the older files from October before that night. October 15th, 11:47 p.m., Grace in the nursery in her diner uniform. Rocking Emma, all three triplets had been crying. He could see the nanny passed out, exhausted on the chair in the corner. But Grace was there, somehow, singing softly. The other two babies quieted just from the sound of her voice. October 22nd, 3:23 a.m., Grace again. This time walking the floor with Lily while humming something that sounded like a lullaby. She looked exhausted, still in her work clothes, but her hands were gentle. Patient, she kissed Lily's forehead and whispered something the audio couldn't pick up. Lily's eyes drifted closed. October 28th, 7:15 p.m. Grace feeding Sophie, actually holding her, maintaining eye contact, smiling when Sophie grabbed her finger. The kind of basic, loving interaction that every baby needed, that his daughters clearly weren't getting anymore. Ethan watched clip after clip, seeing the stark difference. When Grace was there, the triplets thrived. They engaged, they smiled, they trusted. When Victoria was there, they withdrew, cried harder, started showing those signs of failure to thrive the doctor had warned about. The evidence was undeniable. He'd thrown out the one person who actually cared about his daughters, and kept the woman who was slowly breaking them. At 2 a.m., Ethan finally closed the laptop. His scotch was long gone. His head pounded. His entire worldview had shattered and reformed in the span of 3 hours. He thought about calling Victoria immediately, confronting her, ending it. But something held him back, some instinct that said if he acted rashly, she'd find a way to turn it around. To make him look unstable or claim the videos were edited or manufactured, some other lie. Victoria was smart. Connected, ruthless, she'd systematically destroyed Grace's reputation in less than a week. What would she do if she thought Ethan was turning against her? No, he needed to be strategic. Needed proof that even Victoria's family connections couldn't dismiss. He needed more time, but his daughters didn't have time. Emma was already shutting down. The pediatrician had said days, maybe weeks, before the damage became harder to reverse. Babies who failed to thrive could have developmental delays, attachment issues, problems that lasted years. Ethan stood and walked to the nursery. The night nurse, a kind older woman who seemed competent enough, dozed in the chair. All three triplets slept in their cribs. He approached Emma's crib first. She looked so small, so fragile. Her cheeks were thinner than they should be, her breathing shallow. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Baby girl." Emma didn't stir. He checked on Lily next, then Sophie, both sleeping but restless. Like they couldn't fully relax, even in unconsciousness. These were his daughters, his responsibility, his to protect. And he'd failed them spectacularly. The next morning, Ethan called his lawyer before breakfast. "Thomas, I need you to document something for me, quietly." "What kind of documentation?" "Evidence of child neglect. I need it compiled legally with timestamps and authentication, ready to present in court if necessary." A pause. "Ethan, what's going on?" "I'll explain later, but Thomas, this stays between us. Not a word to anyone, especially not Victoria or her family." "Understood." Next, he called Dr. Martinez. "I need you to come to the house today. A full examination of all three girls. Properly documented, Mr. Cole. Is something. Just come, please." Then, he texted Victoria, "Taking a personal day. Don't come by the house. Need space to think." Her response was immediate. Of course, darling, take all the time you need. Love you. The ease of her lie made his skin crawl, finally. He pulled out the business card Grace had slipped into the USB case. Her number was written on it in careful handwriting. He stared at it for a long moment, thinking about everything he'd seen, everything he'd been too blind to notice, everything Victoria had manipulated him into believing. Grace had lost her job trying to protect his daughters, lost her home, her reputation, everything, and she'd still come to him with the truth. Ethan picked up his phone and typed, "I watched everything. You were right. I'm sorry." He hesitated, then added, "I need your help, please." He hit send before he could overthink it. 3 minutes later, his phone rang. "Mr. Cole." Grace's voice was cautious, disbelieving. "Call me Ethan." He rubbed his face. "And I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest, okay? That night I found you with Emma. You were..." He couldn't quite say it. "Why did you do that?" Silence then. Quietly, "Because my body still produces milk, because I lost my son 15 months ago and sometimes my body forgets he's gone. Because Emma was starving and desperate, and her voice broke. I couldn't watch her suffer when I could help, even if it meant losing everything." Something in Ethan's chest cracked open. "Olivia was right about you." "What?" "In her letter. She said you had gentle hands and a patient heart. She said if anything happened to her, I should find people like you." He paused. "I think she meant I should find you specifically." Grace was crying now. He could hear it in her breathing. "I don't know how to fix this," Ethan admitted. "Victoria has connections, power, money. If I confront her wrong, she'll make both our lives hell, but I can't. I won't let her near my daughters anymore." "What do you need from me?" "The truth in front of witnesses. I'm gathering evidence, building a case. But I need you to be willing to testify to what you've seen, what you've experienced. Even if it means facing Victoria directly, I'll do it. No hesitation. Whatever you need. Those babies come first." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling something like hope for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Ethan." Grace's voice was soft. "Watch them today. Really watch them. See if they're reaching for you or pulling away. That'll tell you everything you need to know about what they've been through." After she hung up, Ethan went back to the nursery. The morning shift nanny, another Victoria hire, was changing Lily with efficient but cold movements. "Lily cried." The nanny ignored it. "I'll take over," Ethan said. The woman looked startled. "Sir, I can handle," I said. "I'll take over." His voice left no room for argument. She left. Ethan approached Lily's changing table. His daughter flinched, just slightly, just enough. His 6-month-old daughter flinched when he reached for her. Like she expected to be handled roughly, expected it to hurt. The rage that filled him then was cold and absolute. Victoria Price had done this, had broken his daughter's trust in the world, had taught them that the people who should love them most would only hurt them. And now he was going to make sure she paid for every single moment of it. Ethan chose the setting carefully. Not his office, too private, not a restaurant, too public. The Cole House living room on a Saturday afternoon, with his lawyer Thomas present, Dr. Martinez as witness, and Mrs. Chun, who'd finally agreed to come forward, waiting in the next room, and Grace, sitting in the corner armchair, looking small and terrified but refusing to leave. He'd asked her 3 times if she was sure about this. "Those babies need me here," she'd said. "I'm not running anymore." The triplets were upstairs with a nurse Ethan had personally vet, a warm grandmother type, who'd held each baby and sung to them and earned their smiles within an hour. The kind of person Olivia would have loved. Victoria arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, perfectly put together as always. Cream pantsuit, hair salon fresh, heels clicking on the marble. She swept into the room with her practiced smile. "Darling, I'm so glad you called. I've been worried about you taking time alone." She stopped short when she saw the others. Her eyes landed on Grace. "What is she doing here? Sit down." "Victoria." Ethan's voice was ice. Something flickered across her face. "Ethan, if this is some kind of sit down," she sat, but her spine stayed rigid. "I don't appreciate being summoned like this, or ambushed in front of..." She gestured vaguely at Grace. "Unstable strangers." "Miss Miller isn't unstable, Doctor," Martinez said calmly. "Though I understand you've worked hard to make everyone believe she is." Victoria's smile went sharp. "I don't know what you've been told, but I assure you, I've watched the security footage." Ethan cut her off, all of it. Every moment from the past month, the color drained from Victoria's face. Just for a second. Then her composure snapped back into place. "I don't know what you think you saw. I saw you hurt my daughters." His voice was quiet. Deadly. Multiple times. I saw you neglect them, intimidate them, instruct nannies to withhold proper care. I saw you treat 3 helpless babies like they were inconveniences you had to endure. That's ridiculous. November 8th, 2:47 p.m. You grabbed Sophie's leg hard enough to leave bruises. Victoria's jaw tightened. She was fussy. I was repositioning her. November 10th. You gave them cold bottles and left them crying for 37 minutes. Babies need to learn. November 12th. You changed Sophie without washing your hands, twisted her arm in her clothing, and walked out while she was screaming in pain. Thomas held up a tablet. We have all of it authenticated and time-stamped. Miss Price, along with medical documentation of the triplets' malnourishment and failure to thrive. Victoria stood abruptly. This is insane. You're listening to a waitress with a dead baby who's clearly obsessed with replacing it. Don't. Grace's voice cut through the room. She stood too, hands clenched at her sides. Don't you dare use my son against me. Oh, please. Everyone knows you've been stalking this family, showing up uninvited, forcing yourself into situations. You fired the nanny that night on purpose, Grace said. You arranged for me to be called so Ethan would find me in a compromising position. You orchestrated that entire scene? That's a lie, is it? Ethan's voice was dangerous now because I went back further in the footage. I found the texts you sent the nanny, the ones where you told her to leave early that night, where you confirmed my schedule would bring me home at exactly the right time. Victoria's perfect mask cracked. You don't understand. I was protecting you from what? A woman who actually cared about my daughters. From her. Victoria pointed at Grace. From someone trying to worm her way into your life. Using your grief and those babies to manipulate you. The only person manipulating anyone here is you, Thomas said coldly. You've systematically destroyed Miss Miller's reputation through a coordinated campaign of slander. Lost her job, her home, isolated her from the community. We have documentation of every anonymous complaint you filed, every phone call you made to her employers and landlord. Victoria's eyes widened, then narrowed. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Mrs. Chun stepped into the room, and Victoria went pale. I kept copies of everything. The texts you sent me telling me to stay away. The instructions you gave nannies to minimize care. The envelope you took from me that was meant for Mr. Cole. You have no right. I have every right to protect those babies. Mrs. Chun's voice was steel. Their mother asked me to, and I failed her once. I won't fail her again. Ethan walked to the side table and picked up a manila envelope. This is Olivia's letter. The one you intercepted. The one where she specifically asked me to trust people like Grace. People with gentle hands and patient hearts. Not people like you. He opened it, pulled out the worn pages, read aloud. If something happens to me, please find people like Grace. People with gentle hands and patient hearts. Don't let anyone near them who sees them as accessories or inconveniences. His voice cracked on the last line. My wife saw through you before I did. She knew what you really were. Victoria's composure finally shattered. She was dying and paranoid. That letter doesn't mean anything. It means everything. Ethan stepped closer. It means I should have listened to my instincts. Should have paid attention when my daughters cried every time you came near. Should have noticed that they only calmed down for Grace. Those babies are too young to know what they want. They know who loves them. Grace said quietly. Babies always know. Victoria spun toward her. You think you love them. You're projecting your dead son onto children who aren't yours. You're pathetic. Maybe I am. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. Maybe I do see my son when I look at them, but at least I see them at all. At least I care if they're hungry or scared or hurting. When you look at them, you see obstacles to the life you wanted. Inconveniences you have to tolerate until you can ship them off to boarding school. How dare you? Am I wrong? Grace challenged. Look me in the eye and tell me you love those babies. Tell me you'd sacrifice anything for them. Tell me you wake up at night worried about them. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. The silence was damning. I thought so, Grace whispered. Ethan pulled out his phone, pulled up a video file. This is from last night. He pressed play. The sound of crying filled the room of his desperate wail, the kind that meant she was past comforting. On screen, Victoria appeared in the nursery doorway, checked her watch, and sighed heavily. God, I can't wait until they're old enough for boarding school. Her recorded voice said clearly, 3 more years of this and I'll lose my mind. Then she walked away, left Emma crying, closed the door on a baby who needed her. The video ended. The living room was silent. "Get out," Ethan said finally. Victoria's head snapped up. "What? Get out of my house, out of my life, away from my daughters. We're done. You can't. We're engaged. Not anymore." He pulled the engagement ring from his pocket. She'd left it on the bathroom counter once and never asked for it back. He dropped it on the coffee table. "The engagement is off. Your belongings will be shipped to your apartment. You're not welcome here again. Ethan, please," for the first time. Victoria's voice held real panic. "I can change. I can learn to be better with them." "No, you can't. Because you don't want to." He moved toward her. And she actually stepped back. "You wanted to be Mrs. Ethan Cole. You wanted the status, the money, the social position. But you never wanted my daughters. And they deserve better than someone who has to learn to love them. If you do this, you'll regret it," Victoria said, her voice turning vicious. "My family has connections. Lawyers. We'll destroy you. Try." Thomas stood up. "We have documented evidence of child neglect and abuse. We have witness testimony, medical records. If you want to make this a legal battle, Miss Price, you will lose, and your family's reputation will be destroyed in the process." Victoria looked around the room, Athen's cold face, at Thomas's professional detachment, at Mrs. Chone's quiet strength, at Grace's tears and steel. She was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, exposed. Her perfect mask was gone completely now. What remained was ugly. "Fine," she spat. "Have your little family with the help. See if I care. But don't come crying to me when you realize she's just a gold digger using a sob story to trap a wealthy widower." "Grace has asked for nothing," Ethan said. "Unlike you." Victoria grabbed her purse and walked to the door. She paused, looked back. "You're making a mistake." "No," Ethan said quietly. "I made a mistake. I'm fixing it." The door slammed behind her. The room exhaled collectively. Grace sank back into her chair, shaking. "Mrs. Chun came over and squeezed her shoulder. Thomas was already on his phone, probably alerting security to keep Victoria off the property. And Ethan felt like he could breathe for the first time in months. "Is it over?" Grace asked. "The confrontation is. The legal aftermath." Thomas shrugged. "We'll see. But you're protected, both of you upstairs." A baby cried, not the desperate wail from before, just a normal, fussy sound. Grace stood automatically. Can I please?" Ethan said. She went. 3 months later, the mansion felt different. Grace stood at the kitchen counter, warming bottles while morning light streamed through windows that had been opened for the first time in months. The house smelled like coffee and baby powder and something that hadn't existed here in a long time. Warmth. Behind her, Lily banged a plastic spoon against her high chair tray, conducting an invisible orchestra. Sophie gnawed on a teething ring, drool sliding down her chin, and Emma was in Grace's arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, making those small, satisfied sounds that meant she'd just finished eating and was drifting toward a nap. "You're spoiling her," Ethan said from the doorway. But he was smiling. Grace looked up. He was in jeans and a t-shirt. No suit, no tie. It was Saturday, and for the first time since Olivia died. He'd taken the entire weekend off. "Babies can't be spoiled," Grace said. "Only loved. That's what you said last week." And the week before, he came closer, reaching out to stroke Emma's cheek. The baby turned toward his touch, eyes already closing. "I think she's gained weight, 2 pounds since I started." Grace couldn't keep the pride from her voice. "Dr. Martinez says all 3 are back on track, developmentally. It hadn't been a gradual process." The first week after Victoria left, the triplets had been withdrawn, fussy, hard to soothe. But slowly, so slowly, they'd started to trust again. Started reaching instead of flinching, started smiling instead of crying. Grace had moved into the mansion's guest room temporarily, just until they found a permanent nanny, Ethan had said. But weeks turned into months, and neither of them mentioned her leaving anymore. She worked officially, now salary, benefits, everything legal and above board, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like coming home to the family she'd thought she'd lost forever. "I'm making pancakes," Ethan announced. "Fair warning. They'll probably be terrible. You made pancakes last weekend, and they were terrible. But I'm determined to master this." He pulled out a mixing bowl with the confidence of someone who'd conquered boardrooms, but was utterly defeated by breakfast foods. Grace bit back a smile. "Need help?" "Absolutely not. This is a matter of pride now." He started measuring flour with intense concentration. Lily banged her spoon harder, apparently commenting on his technique. After breakfast pancakes that were only slightly burned, Grace took the triplets to the playroom while Ethan cleaned up. The room had been redecorated in soft colors filled with age-appropriate toys, transformed from the sterile space Victoria had preferred into something that actually felt like it belonged to children. Sophie was attempting to crawl, face scrunched with determination. Lily played with blocks, knocking them over and laughing at the crash. Emma sat contentedly in Grace's lap, watching her sisters with serious eyes. "You're going to be the thoughtful one, aren't you?" Grace murmured, kissing the top of Emma's head. Always watching, always thinking. Emma made a small noise that might have been agreement. The doorbell rang. Grace tensed, automatically, old habits from the Victoria era, when every visitor felt like a threat. But it was just Sarah, finally making good on her promise to visit. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, taking in the scene. "You look so domestic," Grace laughed. "Is that good or bad?" "Good. Definitely good." Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, and Lily immediately crawled over to investigate this new person. "You look happy, Grace, like really happy." "I haven't seen you like this since before," she stopped, "since before James." Grace finished quietly. "It's okay, you can say his name." Sarah picked up Lily carefully. "Does it still hurt?" Every day, Grace's arms tightened around Emma. "But it's different now. Before, the pain was just empty, like carrying around a black hole. Now it's," she searched for words, "now it's more like a scar, still there, still tender sometimes. But healed enough that I can function around it. These babies are lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have them." Grace watched Sophie finally coordinate her limbs enough to move forward an inch. "They gave me a reason to keep breathing when I'd forgotten how." Ethan appeared in the doorway with coffee for both of them. He'd learned how Grace took hers, 2 sugars, a splash of cream without asking. Small intimacies that had developed naturally over shared midnight feedings and early morning chaos. "How's the job hunt going?" he asked Sarah. "Still terrible. Turns out English degrees don't open as many doors as college promised." She sipped her coffee. "But hey, at least I'm not being systematically destroyed by an evil socialite. So I'm doing better than Grace was a few months ago." "Too soon?" Grace asked at Ethan's wince. "Maybe a little." He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Though I heard Victoria left Willow Creek, moved to Boston to be near her sister." "Good riddance," Sarah muttered. Grace felt a twinge of something that might have been pity. Victoria had lost everything. The engagement, her social standing, her reputation. The Price family had distanced themselves from her, embarrassed by the scandal. But then Grace remembered Emma's hollow eyes, Sophie's flinch, Lily's desperate cries in the night, and the pity evaporated. She made her choices, Grace said. "She did," Ethan agreed. "And we're making ours." That afternoon, while the babies napped, Grace found herself in the backyard. The November chill had given way to a surprisingly warm day. She sat on the stone bench by Olivia's rose garden, the one part of the grounds that Ethan still tended himself. He found her there 20 minutes later. "Penny, for your thoughts." He sat beside her, close, but not touching. "Just thinking about Olivia." Grace traced a finger along the bench's carved edge. "How she saw something in me before I saw it myself. She was good at that. Seeing people's potential." Ethan's voice went soft. "I miss her." Every day, I know, they sat in comfortable silence over the past months. They'd developed an easy rhythm, comfortable with quiet, able to just exist in each other's presence without filling every moment with words. "Grace," Ethan turned toward her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. That night I found you with Emma. When you were..." He paused. "When did your body start producing milk again?" Grace's breath caught. She'd known this conversation would come eventually, but she still wasn't prepared for it. "It never really stopped," she admitted. "After James died, they gave me pills to dry it up, but my body didn't listen. For months I'd wake up soaking wet, my body still trying to feed a baby that wasn't there." She swallowed hard. "The doctors said it was normal, that sometimes bodies take longer to understand what minds already know. And when you fed Emma, it felt like..." Grace struggled to articulate something she barely understood herself. "Like my body finally had a purpose again. Like all that milk that had nowhere to go suddenly had meaning." She looked at him. "Does that sound crazy?" "No." Ethan's eyes were soft. "It sounds like love." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not trying to replace him. James will always be, I know." Ethan reached over and took her hand. The touch sent electricity up her arm. "You're not replacing anyone. You're healing. There's a difference." His thumb traced circles on her palm. Grace's heart hammered. "Ethan, I'm falling for you," he said quietly. "I've been fighting it for weeks, telling myself it's too soon, that you're just here for the girls, that I'm being inappropriate." But I can't. He met her eyes. I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. Grace's breath stuttered. You're grieving, and I'm just the help, really. You're vulnerable, and you're not just anything. Ethan's voice was fierce. You saved my daughters. You stood up to Victoria when no one else would. You sacrificed everything because you cared more about 3 babies than your own safety. He squeezed her hand. That's not just the help, that's extraordinary. I don't know how to do this, Grace whispered. I don't know how to be part of something like this. Your world, your life. I'm a waitress with a GED who grew up in foster care, and I'm a widower with 3 babies who almost destroyed their lives because I was too blind to see what was right in front of me. He smiled sadly. We're both broken, Grace. Maybe that's exactly why this could work. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not enough? You're already enough. You've been enough since the day Olivia met you in that diner. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm just asking you to stay, Grace felt. Tears spill over. I'm scared. Me too. Ethan pulled her closer, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. But I'm more scared of waking up one day and realizing I let you slip away. Because I was too afraid to take a chance. They sat like that for a long time. Grace's head against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The afternoon sun warmed them both. From inside, they could hear Mrs. Chun singing to the babies. The sound of normal, happy life. Okay, Grace whispered finally. Okay, I'll stay. She looked up at him, saw her own hope reflected in his eyes. Not just for the babies, for this, for us. Whatever this becomes, Ethan smiled, really smiled for the first time since Olivia died. Whatever this becomes. He kissed her forehead, gentle, promising, full of possibility. Inside, Emma started crying, not distressed, just awake and wanting attention. Grace stood, pulling Ethan with her. Come on. Your daughter needs you, our daughter, Ethan said. If you're staying, they're yours too. Grace's heart felt too big for her chest. Yeah, she said softly. Our daughters. They walked inside together, toward the sound of babies and life and everything that felt like coming home. 6 months after Victoria left, Grace received an envelope that would change everything. It arrived on a Tuesday morning while Ethan was at work and the triplets were down for their nap. Grace was folding laundry in the living room, domestic, peaceful, almost boring in the best possible way, when Mrs. Chun brought in the mail. This one's addressed to you, Mrs. Chun said, handing her a manila envelope with no return address. Grace's stomach tightened. Anonymous mail still made her nervous. A leftover from Victoria's campaign of terror, but the handwriting was shaky, elderly, not Victoria's sharp script. She opened it carefully. Inside, a letter and several official-looking documents. Grace unfolded the letter first. Dear Miss Miller, my name is Patricia Hinshaw. You don't know me, but I've known about you for over a year. I was the head nurse at Willow Creek General's maternity ward the night you lost your son. I'm dying, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe days. And I can't die with this secret. There was a mistake that night. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. Grace's hands started shaking. She kept reading. You came in at 11:47 p.m. in premature labor, 28 weeks. Your son was born at 1:23 a.m. He was small, struggling, but alive. We took him to the NICU immediately. At the same time, Olivia Cole was brought in with complications. She delivered triplets, or what we thought were triplets, at 2:14 a.m. 4 babies total, all premature, all in distress. The night was chaos. Understaffed, overwhelmed, 2 emergency C-sections happening simultaneously. In the chaos, there was a mix-up with the identification bands. Grace's vision blurred. She had to read the next line 3 times before it made sense. Your son didn't die that night, Miss Miller. He was accidentally labeled as one of the Cole triplets. The baby we told you had passed away was actually the 4th Cole infant, a boy who didn't survive the first hour. The letter fell from Grace's hands. No, this wasn't possible. This was some sick joke, some new torture from Victoria, but the documents. Grace's shaking fingers picked up the papers that had fallen to the floor. DNA test results official, stamped, dated 3 weeks ago. Comparing samples from Grace Miller and Emma Cole. Probability of maternity. 9,997%. Grace couldn't breathe. The room spun. She gripped the edge of the couch, trying to stay upright as 15 months of grief and confusion and instinctive connection suddenly made horrifying. Perfect sense. Emma was hers, her son hadn't died, her baby had been taken from her. raised by another family, and she'd been given a dead infant and told to grieve. Miss Grace, Mrs. Chun's voice came from far away. Are you all right? You've gone pale. Grace couldn't answer, couldn't move, could only stare at the test results that proved what her body had known all along. The milk that never stopped, the instant connection, the way Emma settled in her arms like she belonged there, because she did belong there. Emma was her daughter. Grace didn't remember Mrs. Chun calling Ethan, didn't remember him rushing home in the middle of a meeting, only became aware of her surroundings when he was kneeling in front of her, hands on her face, saying her name over and over. Grace, Grace, look at me. What happened? She couldn't speak, just handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read, saw the confusion turn to shock, turn to devastation. He looked up at her, then down at the DNA results, then back at her. This can't be real, he whispered. It is. Grace's voice came out broken. I can feel it. I've always felt it. My body knew, Ethan, this whole time. My body was trying to tell me Emma was mine. Ethan sank onto the couch beside her, the papers clutched in his hands. Olivia was pregnant with triplets. We did ultrasounds, genetic testing. Apparently there was a fourth baby, a boy who didn't make it. Grace wiped her eyes. They gave me his body, let me hold him for 4 minutes, and told me it was my son. The horror of it crashed over her again. She'd mourned the wrong baby, had named him James. Had that sonogram picture on her windowsill, carried 15 months of grief for a child she'd never actually known. While her real son, her daughter, Emma, had been right here in this house with this family. I don't understand, Ethan said. How could they make a mistake like that? Grace picked up the letter again, forced herself to read the rest. Through her tears, the hospital covered it up. When I realized what happened 3 days later, when I was double-checking records, I went to administration. They threatened me, said if I came forward, they'd destroy my career, claim I was the one who made the mistake intentionally, potentially face criminal charges. I was a coward. I stayed quiet. I've hated myself every day since. When I heard about the situation with the Cole family a few months ago, the scandal with Victoria Price, your involvement, I knew I had to act. I collected the DNA samples secretly during Emma's last checkup, sent them to a private lab. I'm attaching everything, the original intake records, the mix-up documentation I saved, the DNA results, and a full confession that you can use however you need. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, I don't expect it, but those babies deserve the truth, and you, Miss Miller, deserve to know that your child lived. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Patricia Henshaw, she's dying, Grace said numbly. The nurse who made the mistake, she was dying and wanted to clear her conscience. Ethan set the papers down carefully when he looked at Grace. His eyes were red. Emma is yours, biologically. Yes, which means, his voice cracked, which means Olivia gave birth to only 2 daughters. Lily and Sophie are mine, but Emma is yours. The full weight of it settled over them. It wasn't a simple mistake that could be acknowledged and moved past. This changed everything, legally. Biologically, fundamentally, Grace had a daughter. Ethan had been raising someone else's child for a year. What do we do? Grace whispered. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the house settle around them. Upstairs, the triplets were still sleeping, unaware that the foundations of their world had just shifted. Finally, Ethan spoke. Emma is yours, legally, morally, biologically. You have every right to. He stopped, swallowed hard. You could take her. No court would stop you once they see this evidence. Don't. Grace's voice was sharp. Don't even think like that. I'm trying to be fair. Fair. Grace turned to him. Fair would have been getting my baby 15 months ago instead of a dead infant and a bottle of pills. Fair would have been knowing my son lived while I was drowning in grief. Fair would have been, she broke off, breathing hard. Ethan reached for her hand. I know, I'm sorry. I don't want you to feel trapped or obligated. Shut up. Grace squeezed his fingers. Just shut up and listen to me, he nodded. Emma is biologically mine. I know that now. I can feel it in my bones. She's my daughter. Grace's tears fell freely, but she's also yours. You've raised her for a year. You've loved her, cared for her, stayed up with her when she was sick. You're her father in every way that matters. Grace, and those other 2 girls upstairs. Lily and Sophie, I love them just as much as I love Emma. They're mine too, even though we don't share blood. She met his eyes. Biology doesn't make a family, Ethan. Love does. And we're all 5 of us. We're already a family. Ethan pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. She felt his shoulders shake with silent sobs. I don't want to split them up, Grace whispered. Emma, Lily, Sophie, they're sisters. They've been together since birth. Separating them would destroy them, so what do? Grace pulled back enough to see his face. We tell the truth. We take this evidence and we sue the hospital for what they did for the cover-up, for the negligence, for giving me the wrong baby and letting me believe my son died. Her voice hardened. They don't get to walk away from this, agreed, but Emma stays here, with her sisters, with you. Grace touched his face, and with me, we raise all three of them together as partners, as she hesitated. As a family, Ethan finished, a real one this time. Yeah, Grace managed a watery smile. A real one. Ethan kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of grief and hope tangled together. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he said. I should have told you weeks ago. I love you, Grace, not just because you're Emma's biological mother, but because you're you, because you're brave and fierce and you love my daughters with your whole heart. I love you too, Grace kissed him again, and I love those babies upstairs. All three of them, biology or not, they're mine, and I'm not going anywhere. That evening, Grace stood in the nursery doorway watching Ethan read bedtime stories. Lily was already asleep, Sophie fighting it. And Emma looked up from her crib and saw Grace, smiled that bright, knowing smile, and reached her little arms up. Mama, Emma said clearly. Her first real word. Grace's breath caught. She walked over and picked up her daughter, and held her close. Yeah, baby girl, she whispered. Mama's here. Mama's always been here. Emma patted her face with one chubby hand, then laid her head on Grace's shoulder with a sigh of perfect contentment. And Grace understood. It didn't matter that she'd spent 15 months grieving the wrong baby. It didn't matter that Emma had been raised by another mother first. It didn't matter that the truth had come so late. What mattered was this moment, this child, this family they'd built from grief and love and sheer determination to protect the ones who needed them most. Biology had given her Emma, but love had given her Lily and Sophie too, and Ethan, and a home, and a future that finally, looked like the one she'd dreamed of when she'd first learned she was pregnant all those months ago. We're okay, she whispered to Emma. We're all going to be okay, and for the first time in 15 months. Grace actually believed it.